The first time I put on those glasses, I thought it was just a trick of the light. I remember standing in that tiny cluttered optician's shop, squinting at my reflection in a dusty mirror. The optician, a peculiar elderly man with a stooped back and keen eyes, had assured me these were special glasses. I had chuckled at that, dismissing it as a sales gimmick. I was a linguistics major at the local college, a fact I had shared with the optician during our casual conversation. He seemed intrigued by my passion for languages, both modern and ancient. As I left his shop with the new glasses, he whispered, almost cryptically, "You'll see the world differently with these." Back in my small, somewhat untidy apartment, as I settled in for the evening, I put on the glasses for a clearer view of the linguistics text I was studying. That's when I saw it for the first time: strange symbols, floating just above the book's title. There were no script I recognized, a jumble of lines and curves that made no sense. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was fatigue, but the symbols remained, undulating gently in the air. I spent that whole night examining the glasses, looking for some sort of digital display or projection technology. There was nothing. They were just ordinary, albeit strangely effective, glasses. As I drifted to sleep, the thought that lingered in my mind was not fear or worry, but a burning curiosity. What were these symbols, and why could I see them? The following day was when the true strangeness began. I wore the glasses to my morning lecture, a habit I'd formed ever since I got my prescription. As I walked through the bustling campus, I noticed the symbols again. This time, they weren't just hovering over my book, but above people's heads. Each person had a different set of symbols, a unique floating script that seemed to shimmer slightly in the air. My initial reaction was one of disbelief. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, a side effect of sleep deprivation or stress. But as the day wore on, the symbols remained, undeterred by my skeptical scrutiny. In class, I found it hard to concentrate on the professor's lecture, my attention drawn to the mysterious words above his head. As a linguistics student, I was fascinated. Here was a language, or something resembling one, that I had never seen before. It didn't match any ancient script I had studied or any contemporary language I was familiar with. I took to carrying a notebook with me, discreetly sketching the symbols I saw, trying to find patterns or repetitions. I knew I should have been concerned, maybe even scared, but my academic curiosity overshadowed everything else. I felt like I was on the verge of an incredible discovery, something groundbreaking in the field of linguistics. I was so consumed by this thought that I barely noticed my friends' concerned glances or the way I started to isolate myself, spending hours in my room, poring over the symbols. It was an obsession, I admit, but one that felt justified, even necessary. I had stumbled upon something unexplainable, and I couldn't just let it go. Little did I know, this fascination would lead me down a path far darker and more unsettling than any linguistics puzzle I had ever encountered. In the weeks that followed, my life became a cycle of attending classes and then rushing back to my apartment to study the symbols. I scoured every linguistic database I had access to, but found nothing. The symbols were like a language that didn't belong to any time or place known to history. Friends started dropping by less and less, put off by my obsession. I hardly noticed their absence, the mystery consumed me entirely. Gradually, I began to notice patterns. The symbols seemed to change with people's emotions or actions. A person laughing with friends had lighter, almost dancing scripts, whereas someone in a heated argument had sharp, jagged symbols. I also noticed that some people had longer strings of symbols, while others had only a few. It was like each set of symbols was a reflection of the person it hovered over. My friends and family became increasingly worried. My roommate, Mark, tried to confront me about my behavior. "You're always holed up in your room, scribbling in that notebook. You barely eat, and you've missed a bunch of classes," he said one evening, his expression a mix of concern and frustration. I barely listened, my eyes involuntarily flicking to the symbols above his head, wondering what they meant. Then, one night, I made a breakthrough. I had been studying the symbols above a stranger in a coffee shop when I realized that one of them kept repeating. I had seen it multiple times, across different people. After hours of cross-referencing and analysis, I managed to translate it. The symbol meant death. A chill ran down my spine. Was I seeing people's fates? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. I wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, a product of my overworked brain, but the linguist in me couldn't. The pattern was too consistent, the translation too clear. I was on the verge of something profound, something terrifying. The symbols were not just random, they were messages, and I had just begun to understand them. The realization that I might be seeing people's fates was like a weight pressing down on me, both exhilarating and terrifying. I tested my theory, observing people who had the death symbol over their heads. It was a grim vigil, one that wore heavily on my conscience. Then, it happened. One evening, I was sitting in a quiet corner of the library, my eyes flitting from person to person, notebook in hand. That's when I saw him, an older man, his face etched with lines of worry, the death symbol floating ominously above his head. But this time, there were more symbols, a string of them forming a coherent phrase. My hands trembled as I deciphered it. Accident on the way home. I watched, frozen, as the man gathered his belongings and left the library. Part of me wanted to run after him, to warn him, but another part was held back by fear and doubt. What if I was wrong? What if I was just imagining all this? The next day, the news confirmed my worst fears. There had been an accident. The man from the library had been fatally struck by a car on his way home. The symbols had been right. Panic gripped me. The realization that I could see people's deaths was overwhelming. I was tormented by the thought that I might have prevented it, that I had this knowledge and did nothing. But more than that, I was scared of the power the glasses seemed to possess. It was a responsibility I hadn't asked for and wasn't sure I could handle. In the days that followed, I became a shadow of myself, haunted by what I had seen and what it meant. I tried not to look at people, to avoid seeing their fates. But it was like trying to ignore the sun in the sky impossible. The symbols were always there, a constant reminder of the burden I now carried. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to find answers. I had to understand what these glasses were and why they had come into my possession. My only lead was the optician who had sold them to me. I had to go back to that strange little shop and confront him. But when I did, what I found only deepened the mystery and my sense of dread. In the wake of the tragedy, I found myself caught in a moral quagmire. Knowing the fates of those around me was a curse I couldn't escape. I tried to intervene a few times, to prevent what I saw, but it was futile. The events unfolded regardless of my actions, as if the symbols were not predictions but immutable truths. Desperate for answers, I returned to the optician's shop. The familiar bell chimed as I entered, but the cozy clutter I remembered was gone. In its place was an empty room, dust swirling in the air where shelves of glasses once stood. The optician was nowhere to be found. It was as if the shop had never existed. I left the empty shop feeling more alone than ever. The one person who might have shed light on my situation had vanished into thin air. My friends, concerned by my erratic behavior and obsession, had started to keep their distance. I couldn't blame them, I barely recognized myself anymore. I spent my days wandering the city, haunted by the symbols and the knowledge they imparted. The glasses had become a part of me, a lens through which I saw the world, whether I wore them or not. They had altered something fundamental in my perception, a change I feared was irreversible. The isolation was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out. How could I explain what I was experiencing? Who would believe me? The symbols were my burden alone to bear. In the end, I made a decision. I stopped wearing the glasses. It didn't stop the visions completely, but it dulled them, made them less intrusive. I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, to reconnect with my friends and resume my studies. But the experience had changed me in ways I couldn't undo. The symbols still haunted the edges of my vision, a ghostly reminder of what I had seen and what I still knew. I learned to live with it, to ignore it as best I could. But there was always a part of me that remained on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The final twist came one quiet evening as I passed a mirror in my apartment. My reflection stared back at me, tired and worn. And there, hovering above my head, were symbols I hadn't seen before. New, ominous, and undeciphered. I stood there for a long time, staring at the reflection, at the unknown script that spelled out a fate I couldn't read. It was a chilling reminder that the mystery was far from solved, that there were still secrets hidden in the depths of those symbols. And somewhere, out there in the world, the glasses that had started it all were waiting, their lenses holding truths too terrifying to comprehend.